So let's talk about the formula for success. And I'm sure many of you would agree, and it's very simple. Success is a combination of brilliant strategy and excellence in execution. Okay, if you want a successful organization and you're at a very senior level, these are the levers that you can pull. What I have found through, as I said, interviews of many clients, is most companies are very good at developing brand plans or strategy plans. They have rigorous processes in place. On the execution side, I would say most don't have any process and basically leave execution to chance. And based on the survey here, we have some who are good at both. There's a group that actually is challenged with more on the execution side. And really my message to you, if you can relate to this, is if you really want to crush your numbers, don't leave execution to chance. So it's very interesting. I've looked at the latest research to see what it says in the area of business execution, because I come from an industry that's research-based, and we look at studies to justify, why we sell our products. So looking at the research, there's probably 10 times more research done in the area of strategy than there is business execution. That could be the reason why companies are very poor at execution. So let's look at the first piece of research, which is a book called The Execution Premium. And The Execution Premium is written by Robert Kaplan. And Robert is a professor at Harvard Business School. He's authored 14 business books and over 150 papers, including 23 of them which were featured in Harvard Business Review. In this book, The Execution Premium, he concluded, and he's the one who's famous for this quote, that 90% of companies fail to execute. I'm sure many of you may not even be sure if you're executing well because you don't even have a plan to validate it against. Okay, not too long ago, March 2015. The Harvard Business Review featured the whole issue of March 2015, featured the concept of why strategy execution unravels and what to do about it. And there were several key findings that came out of it. One that I felt was most insightful was a survey they highlighted of more than 400 global CEOs who said their number one challenge facing them, and these are CEOs in Asia, Europe, United States, probably even Canada, out of a list of 80 issues was, interestingly enough, executional excellence, more so than innovation, geopolitical instability, and top-line growth. So, according to these CEOs, which I'm sure everyone on this line probably feels the same way, that execution is critical. Another expert that I looked at was Ram Charan, who says that 70% of strategic failures are due to poor execution of leadership. It's really due to lack of smarts or vision. And Ram is one of these guys who advises senior executives and boards of directors. He's known for his insight into what makes companies successful and why other companies are not. And he's also authored a number of books, I believe it's 20, and this book, which is great, the discipline, execution, the discipline of getting things done. I just want to offer, you may have seen this before, but this is a great quote, and this is, I think, why many of you are here. It's by Morris Chang, and Morris is the founding chairman of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, which is like the Intel of Asia. And he says, and you can read it here, without strategy, execution is aimless. Without execution, strategy is useless. And I think, that summarizes sort of where we're at. And if we look at sort of the impact of poor execution, actually, just to define, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but if you want to define execution, because, I think a starting base for us all being in the same place is, what is execution? And this is what I've defined it as: the discipline of getting the most important things done. Okay? And if you think as a sales leader, as a sales and marketing leader, if you're able to get your critical things done and do them well, chances are you're going to hit your numbers. So I've worked with a number of clients who've had challenges, and some of the execution areas were not within the commercial unit, but within supporting departments. But this is the impact when you're poorly executing as an organization. What they've said to me is their customers get frustrated with them, their teams get disengaged, they have challenges making their sales numbers, they find themselves stressed, and this is the business unit heads, each quarter when they have to explain the performance gaps of their business. So why are you leaving execution to chance? Why are you gambling with your success? Because this is what happens to companies that are not sure where they're going from a execution perspective. They really tend to become accepting of good performance, not expecting great performance. Their business unit is not in the top. If you're competing business units, you're not one of the top performing ones. They tend to spend a lot of time looking for answers and explaining. Their stress levels are very high, and they find themselves working or having to work much harder than their counterparts. So I don't want you, to have to experience this, and that's why I'm sharing with you my strategies and my approach for executing with excellence. Okay, and let's just do a quick comparison. I'm going to get into the meaty stuff, but just looking at most organizations, and I'm sure most of you would agree, that when it comes down to strategy, companies spend 2+ months every year building their brand plans, getting ready to present to senior management. On the execution side, if they spend 1 or 2 days bringing sales managers in to talk about execution, that would be probably best in class at this point. Most companies have a well-defined formal process for building strategy. When it comes to execution, nobody I know has a process, right? Brand plans, companies develop detailed brand plans with tactics. When it comes to execution, there are no formal plans. I'm sure out of all the listeners, maybe 1% have a actual execution plan, a formal execution plan. Certainly on the marketing side, things like market share and growth targets are set and measured, where on the execution side, there are very little metrics. Just grabbing a quick drink here. So I've compiled a list through my research of the top 10 components of great, or top 10 elements of great execution. And there are no specific order of these, but one, you need to do some planning to be great at execution. You need to be focused. Your team needs to know what the key focus is. You need a team of sales managers. Well, if you're one sales manager with 12 reps, well, it's very easy to be focused. Once you start to scale to 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 managers, focus and alignment become very challenging. The team needs to be very clear. What you want is you want buy-in and ownership to the execution plan, and you want to have levels of accountability. You need strong leadership, support from other departments, metrics that are going to measure how well you're doing versus what you said you're going to do. And you need to have discipline to have the right things in place to make sure that you're on track. So if you think of these 10 elements, let's look at what the 3-step process is. Okay. And let me just, okay, so let's get into the very top level. If you look at a calendar, most of brand planning happens November, December. There's no reason why organizations can't be doing their execution plans post brand plans being done or marketing plans being done. But if you're not on track, it probably doesn't hurt to do it at the end of the first quarter either. So step 1 is building an execution plan. And as I said before, I bet you maybe 1% or one of the viewers has an execution plan. Step 2 is a year-round endeavor to lead execution. And that comes from both senior management and from frontline management to really make sure that your troops and your salespeople and your marketing people are on track. And the third component to really executing with excellence is measuring to make sure you're doing the right things. And to me, that's about having management discipline in place. So let's get into and explode each one of these and provide you some insights. So if we look at building a plan, or building an execution plan, because I bet you most folks don't even know what an execution plan is, because it's just not part of the day-to-day management processes. What I found has worked best is holding a team planning meeting with your sales management and marketing teams in place. And really, if you look at these folks in the picture, what we do is we get them to brainstorm, and really looking at brainstorming, what are the key things they need to do extremely well to crush their sales numbers? And then from that, we start to cluster those ideas and come up with critical success factors. And what we really need to do is realize that as an organization, or most organizations, probably try to do too much. So we get clients to narrow down the 3 key things they need to do that'll give them the most likelihood of success. So it's one, a brainstorming process to build the plan. It's then prioritizing, and from there, we sit down with the team and we do one of the hardest things. Most companies are pretty quickly able to come to what they need to do to be successful. The most challenging part is how. How are they going to do it? And the key for you is, if you want to do that, you got to sit down with the team and build a plan for each of your critical success factors. How are you going to get there? And that could involve bullet points or key tactics that you're going to use along the way. Okay. Once you have that in place, the 3 key things, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, you then need to define key metrics and build a scorecard. And as Tom Peters said from In Search of Excellence, and many of you may remember him, what gets measured gets done. So the next hardest step from figuring out the hows is figuring out how are you going to measure each of the hows, and putting a metric in place that you can follow through the year, and whether it's broken down by a region, by each of your salespeople, by your marketing team, really putting together your critical success factors and metricing each of the hows that you're going to use, or each of the tactics that you're going to use. Okay, and this guy says it all. When sales are going up, everybody takes credit. When sales are going down, well, you're going to look for excuses as to what's going on. Whoops, let me just give you a chance to read that. So here's what building a plan does. Okay, and I gave you some very simple steps to build a plan, figure out what's critical, narrow that down to 3 areas, figure out how you're going to do each of those ones extremely well, and that may involve other specific plans or tactics like training plans or whatever those may be. So brainstorm, identify the things that really matter for success, develop a detailed plan of action on achieving each of those CSFs, right? Set metrics to keep those on track, and develop a business execution plan and a scorecard that everybody has visibility to monthly. Okay, the next step, so those are 3 steps to step 1, actually 5 steps to building the plan. Once you have the plan in place, you're probably, I don't know, 50% of the way there. Then what happens is people get busy. People get unfocused. Things come up. We're running around trying to please customers, trying to do other things. And really, execution is the job of the business leader. And what they need to do is set up a process in place to make sure that execution is on track. And that looks like coaching and mentoring your team, which is the leader mentoring and coaching their direct reports, the frontline people doing the same with the salespeople. And it's about holding one-on-one meetings every month, making sure that your team has plans to develop their leadership, and their own team is developing plans for their sales reps. So the top people are developing plans to get everybody better. At each level, there's plans to lead and develop their teams. And then on a monthly and quarterly basis, that we're actually looking at how we're doing against the critical things. When sales managers are out in the field coaching, They're coaching around making sure that the reps are doing the critical success factors really well. So you don't want to spend time coaching on things that are unimportant. You want it to tie to execution of your plan. And really the third step, as you can all guess, which I call management discipline, is about developing reporting and having monthly and quarterly review meetings to make sure that, one, you're executing your critical success factors, your key deliverables are happening, and as well as you're developing your people to get better. So just to summarize, okay, from the research we know that most companies fail to execute their strategy, and the number may vary from 50% to 90%, but that's a lot of companies that are actually having challenges. Most companies' employees say their organization is weak at execution. The key is execution requires a couple things. One is leadership. It requires building a plan, leading the plan, and then managing and being disciplined to follow through on the plan. And execution strategy, from my perspective, is very sexy, right? That's the fun part. On the execution side, it requires discipline and a very stringent process that happens on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. But it is critical to crushing your numbers because, again, as I've learned when we've hired competitive people, companies have similar strategies. So in most cases, strategy is not the differentiating factor for success. In my belief, in my research, and my talk with clients, execution becomes that key step for advantage. So I'm going to provide two options here, and then at some point we'll get into questions. I'm just doing a time check. So number one, if you feel that you've learned a lot in the past 30 minutes, it looks like 75% agreed, we could part ways and say, hey, great job, congratulations, and hopefully you can do a better job on executing based on this webinar. As you know, like me, most people forget at least 50% of what they learned in a short period of time, and then basically by the end of 2 or 3 weeks, if they've done nothing, then most of it's forgotten. So I do have an offer, and I'm just going to make it very quick, and really it involves looking at the 3-step process, and if that's something that you want to do, we do it one small step at a time. Okay? And this is if you're a VP of Sales and Marketing, a business unit director, a VP or sales director or national sales manager, this may be more in line for you than if you're a regional sales manager. You can certainly work with your team, but this is a much more comprehensive approach. And really what we say is, every journey starts with a small or a single step. And the single step I ask is, number one, if you'd like, we can help you build your execution plan and work with your team to facilitate a meeting and build up your execution plan and documentation and do it very inexpensively. We'll cover off the key things that I talked about in building the plan, and really what you get out of it is a highly aligned sales team. We have 4 customers who are working on this right now. Ownership of the plan, improved communication between sales and marketing, executional excellence, and really having a high level of accountability for your whole team. Okay? And all you need to do if you say, hey, I'm interested, look at the last link and you book a 15-minute meeting with me and we can talk about. The blue line is probably where you're trending right now. Okay? You've got good strategies in place, you're doing a fair job in executing, chances are you'll make your numbers. But if you really want to crush your numbers, to me it comes down to great execution. And I've given you a very simple flow of steps. It's not much more complicated than that, but it's really about doing it and making sure you follow the steps. Okay? And at the end of the year, you could be sitting back and looking and saying, wow, I crushed my numbers this year, and I did it through great execution. And the fact is, if you do it once and you understand the process, you can continue to do it and crush your numbers every single year.